So if your MB is equal to your MC, what is that exogenous something that can help you to take a decision? Because if you are at this point, then really your decision making is difficult. Now that something, that exogenous something, is called an incentive or disincentive principle, and that is the third principle in economics. Now you can think of incentive as a reward and you can think of disincentive as a penalty. So that means if you are unable to take a decision, if you have landed at this point, then maybe an incentive can raise the benefits of that option and help you to take that decision, or a disincentive of penalty can push you away from that option and not make you take the decision, right? So for example, let's say, I'm talking about let's say attendance in a class. If I'm teaching a class on campus and I really want students to come to class, okay? So a student has to take the decision that whether I should go to class, right? And he is indifferent, right? He doesn't care for this class. So he neither sees any benefit or he sees any cost of going to class. Now as a teacher, if I give him an incentive, if I say that every time you show up in class, you get 1 extra credit point, then basically I'm giving a reward or an incentive. In other words, I'm boosting up the marginal benefit of the student and enabling the student to take the decision, right? On the other side, I could also do something like, let's say, okay, if you do not show up to class, then you are going to lose a point every time. So in this case, I am putting a penalty, and in other words, I am boosting up the cost of not coming to class. So the student will see that there is higher cost of absenting from class, and he will actually end up coming to class. So you can see incentives or disincentives can really help in taking a decision. It is something exogenous that helps a person to take a decision. And this will also be true at the macro level, at the level of the society. The government could give you an incentive or give you a disincentive for doing something or not doing something. For example, the government could give you, a tax credit, which will be like an incentive and enable you to do something, or the government could really raise the tax rates and create a disincentive or penalty for you to not do something. Or maybe some policies like a jail time for doing something would enable people not to take that option and not to go down that route. So incentive or disincentive, rewards or penalties often work towards making a person or a society take a decision or not take a decision when they are indifferent between the two. Now, before I end this part, before we go away, we move away from this incentive-disincentive principle, let me tell you a small story. And this story is about Cobra effect, and you can Google it if you want. There are also some nice YouTube videos about the Cobra effect. So this story is about a small village in northern India, a mountainous village. And in this village, there was a problem with poisonous cobra, poisonous snakes. You may have heard about the name or maybe not. Cobra is a really poisonous snake. So it's one of the most poisonous snakes in the world, right? So in this northern Indian village, there was a problem with lot of cobras. And the government really couldn't think of how to get rid of this problem. So the government decided to go with the incentive principle and said, okay, fine, anybody who catches a cobra, any villager who catches a cobra and brings to the local municipal office is going to receive a cash reward. So the cash reward was going to work as an incentive for people to catch cobra, and the government was expecting that in no time the villagers would start catching cobra and bringing them to the local municipal office, and the village would be free of cobra. Now what happened was the poor villagers heard about this reward, this incentive principle, and they not only started catching cobra and bringing them to the local municipal office, but instead they caught the cobra and started breeding these cobra. at home, right? So they thought that, okay, instead of taking one cobra, if I take 12 cobras, then I will be able to make more money, right? So instead, so there was like this never ending queue, and every person would come in with more and more and more cobras. So that really got the government thinking that where are we going wrong? So now they said, okay, now it's not going to be an incentive principle, but it's going to be a disincentive principle, right? So we are going to punish people if we find you breeding cobra at home. So no more breeding cobra at home. And the government was pretty convinced that if they do that, if they impose a fine, then people are not going to breed cobra anymore. So now what the poor villagers did was, now they don't want to pay a fine, so they let all the cobra go out in the village again. So instead of breeding them at home so that the government does not find them, detect these cobra at home, they let all the cobra out in the village. And the problem actually, aggravated. It became an even bigger problem. The village was infested with more cobras. So you can see that the incentive or the disincentive mechanism is not like a foolproof plan. It may or may not work. And the fact that it fails is the reason that you have so many problems out there in the real world. If all of this worked like we are talking about in theory, then there would be really no problems, no economic crisis, no problems for government. Government would give you an incentive and make you work in that direction, put a disincentive and waver you away from something. But what we study in theory is not really how it works in the real world. And that's why I wanted to talk to you about the cobra effect. Because whenever you look at these from the theoretical perspective, your stance should be, okay, this is what should happen. Whether this happens or not in the real world is really, it depends. And that's why we have the discussion boards in this course. The discussion board is where you really bridge the gap between the theory that you are learning in the class and the real world application of those theories. So when you comment on your discussion board, these are the kind of things I want you to talk about, that where do you see the disconnect between theory and the application of this theory in the real world. Now as we go forward, we are going to move into another section. We are going to move into another section of module 1, and we are going to talk about the next principle in economics.